Hello, welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. Tonight, we turn our focus on a controversial move by the Trump administration, the use of armed forces in immigration enforcement operations. Critics say this amounts to the militarization of migration policy and accuse the administration of using federal firepower as a political weapon, targeting already vulnerable communities. Supporters, however, claim it's a necessary step in restoring order and protecting borders. From Texas to California, these crackdowns have drawn nationwide attention and polarized public opinion. At the heart of this issue is a question of scale, intent, and constitutional boundaries. Are we witnessing a security policy or a campaign strategy? California Governor Gavin Newsom on Tuesday, June 10, condemned President Donald Trump's deployment of U.S. Marines and National Guard troops to Los Angeles, calling it a reckless escalation that has deepened tensions in the city. Speaking in a recorded statement, Newsom accused the president of bypassing state authorities and inflaming what had been a winding down protest movement. Let's take a listen.
This past weekend, federal agents conducted large-scale workplace raids in and around Los Angeles. Those raids continue as I speak. California is no stranger to immigration enforcement, but instead of focusing on undocumented immigrants with serious criminal records and people with final deportation orders, a strategy both parties have long supported, this administration is pushing mass deportations, indiscriminately targeting hardworking immigrant families, regardless of their roots or risk. In response, everyday Angelenos came out to exercise their constitutional right to free speech and assembly, to protest their government's actions. In turn, the state of California and the city and county of Los Angeles sent our police officers to help keep the peace. And with some exceptions, they were successful. If you incite violence or destroy our communities, you're going to be held to account. That kind of criminal behavior will not be tolerated, full stop. Already more than 220 people have been arrested, and we're reviewing tapes to build additional cases, and people will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Again, thanks to our law enforcement officers and the majority of Angelenos who protested peacefully, the situation was winding down and was concentrated in just a few square blocks downtown. But that's not what Donald Trump wanted. He again chose escalation. He chose more force. He chose theatrics over public safety. Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets, illegally and for no reason. This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. These are the men and women trained for foreign combat, not domestic law enforcement. We honor their service. We honor their bravery. But we do not want our streets militarized by our own armed forces, not in LA, not in California, not anywhere. Trump is pulling a military dragnet all across Los Angeles, well beyond his stated intent to just go after violent and serious criminals. His agents are arresting dishwashers, gardeners, day laborers, and seamstresses. That's just weakness masquerading as strength. Donald Trump's government isn't protecting our communities, they're traumatizing our communities. And that seems to be the entire point. Just yesterday, we filed a legal challenge to Donald Trump's reckless deployment of American troops to a major American city. Today, we sought an emergency court order to stop the use of the American military to engage in law enforcement activities across Los Angeles. If some of us could be snatched off the streets without a warrant, based only on suspicion or skin color, then none of us are safe. And we all know this Saturday, he's ordering our American heroes, the United States military, and forcing them to put on a vulgar display to celebrate his birthday, just as other failed dictators have done in the past. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived.
So I'm now joined live by a guest who believes the Trump administration is doing the right thing. We'll start by understanding that view before digging deeper into the ethics, legality, and long-term impact of this aggressive approach. Allow me to introduce Mark Merowitz, a professor of State University of New York Maritime College. Professor, as always, I appreciate you joining us, and I would like to start off easy, if I may. First, I would like to get your reaction to Governor Newsom's recorded statement.
Well, I think it's guided. The point is that Los Angeles is a chaos zone. There's violence, there's looting, there's this unbelievable situation, fires, burnings. His focus is really incorrect. He's focusing on his dispute with the president on who has jurisdiction to send in the National Guard, instead of figuring out how to quell this situation. I should mention quickly that when the fires were raging in Los Angeles not so long ago, Trump worked with Newsom and they sent in the National Guard, and they really needed the help. The bottom line question is, can LA's police handle this? And he keeps talking about arrests and full extent of the law prosecutions. They asked the Attorney General of California in a press conference yesterday, how many arrests have you made? And the Attorney General said, I don't know, ask the sheriff. So the bottom line is the LA police is not capable of handling this. Recently, or some time ago, there was a rooftop party in Los Angeles, which got out of hand to such an extent that people started throwing Molotov cocktails off the roof, and the police couldn't handle it. So the question here is, what should we focus on? Bringing this to an end, this riot to an end, or debating the constitutional issues, which, by the way, I'm a lawyer, whatever the courts decide is the law.
But Professor,
right now, there's a very bad situation in Los Angeles. It's out of control. So Governor Newsom and the mayor of Los Angeles should focus on how to get the streets.
Well, indeed, the situation is very bad in LA, therefore. But how do you think, is it normal for a sitting president to take these drastic actions like this without working with a governor?
Well, you raise a great question. So technically, the governor's consent is required, except in the event of a rebellion. But if you look at American history, which I teach American history, and I can tell you that President Cleveland in 1894 called in the federal troops to quell and quash a labor strike of the Pullman workers, this is railroad workers, on the argument that the trains were carrying United States mail. And by the way, interestingly enough, this is not the first time a governor has fought with the president. Governor Atgeld of Illinois said, I don't need the National Guard, I don't need the federal troops because I can handle it myself. So is it unusual? The National Guard has been called in many times to help civil rights workers, to quell riots in the streets. We had it even in the first administration of Trump. We've had this before. So the point is there a situation which is so out of control where you're seeing, if you're looking, looting of stores? What does this have to do with immigration? People breaking into stores, attacking people on the street, throwing boulders at police, spitting in the police and the soldiers' faces. What does this have to do? If you don't agree with immigration policy, there are ways to peacefully protest.
So do you see this?
Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California said there's no violence because she's on the street.
Do you see it?
If our leaders are standing on the street and they don't see what's going on, we are in very, very big trouble.
Then do you see it as a main objective of deploying armed personnel in immigration operations?
Well, I mean, the ostensible reason to have those personnel is to protect the federal buildings and not to have a widespread military takeover of Los Angeles. But the question is, at what point do you get the help of the federal government? When LA had those fires and the city was burning down, they called in the National Guard and Trump helped them. Now they're fighting over this, and to me, this has a lot of politics too, because Newsom is thinking about 2028 to run for president. And he's starting his campaign now by saying Trump has overreached, and your questions are great. The answers are going to be in the courts. The judges are going to decide whether the president was able to do this or not. But right now, the main priority is to stop the violence in the streets. And somebody's got to do it, and they should really work together. Federal government and state government should work together to get a solution on this and not dilly-dally around and figure out who's in charge, who really should do it, who's not allowed to do it, and make it into a political horse race. I don't think that's right.
So you were coming back to the second question, which I addressed previously about the work and coordination of the action with the governor, like it's happening, and getting critiques of the governor Newsom, as we could watch in advance. So we also see how some say this shows the strength, but not the aggression. Do you believe it's a proportionate response of the head of the state?
You know, the word proportionate is a very tricky word. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't have enough information to know what's going on. But the question you raise is fundamental. It's an excellent question. Does the president have the right to federalize the National Guard in this situation? Is it a rebellion that allows the president to do it, or does it not? A court will decide that. But in the meantime, the judge in that particular lawsuit did not give the injunction to the state to stop the federal National Guard. He didn't do it. He's waiting for tomorrow to have a hearing. So that shows you that the judge is not going to sit there and let this chaos go on. And by the way, if Newsom is right and this is what he wants, you know, there's an old proverb that says, be careful what you wish for. He wants to kick the federal National Guard out. That means he has to be capable of quelling this violence. And I believe strongly, and many, many people in this country believe, that the LA is not capable, it's had riots, it's not capable to handle this situation. They couldn't even handle a party that got out of control. How are they going to handle fires, burning, looting, attacking cars, destroying property? They're not capable of doing it. I think Governor Newsom is not a responsible leader. I don't think so. So the answer of proportionate is beside the point.
Do you think that the voters...
But in the meantime, you've got to do something about it.
You think that the voters in border states also support these moves? Why it's happening? So you explained the inability of the local government to control the situation. But we do understand the situation in LA from your point of view. But why do you think many voters from other states also support this movement?
Well, you know, immigration is the campaign point. One on immigration. The people in the border states have been overwhelmed by illegal immigrants. Now, the question that Newsom raises is whether we should be arresting dishwashers and ordinary people, or whether ICE is arresting criminals. And what ICE is saying, and what Trump is saying, and what the Attorney General is saying is that they're arresting hardened criminals. There's widespread support for arresting criminals who are here in this country illegally. I don't think there's widespread support. I'm a child of immigrants. My parents came here as immigrants. I think that's the great thing about America, to bring in immigrants, of course. But America is not the welcome mat for hardened criminals who are going to come in here. And who are these people on the street, and what are they doing there? They're destroying a beautiful city. I've been in LA. It's a beautiful city. And they're going in and rampaging in the city. Now, here's the other point. If this is not quelled, if this is not quashed, if this is not stopped, it's going to spread to all the other cities in this country, even not border cities, even not border states. It's going to spread everywhere. We already see in New York, where I live, that we're having protests. You want to protest, civilly and peacefully? Of course. But if you want to start looting and burning and attacking and doing that, even the Democrats say you can't do it. But yet they seem to be, delusional to not stand on the street like Maxine Waters and say they don't see any problem and no violence.
Then, Professor, from your point of view, this policy improves national security in a country, right?
I don't know how to define national security. I don't think this is an issue of national security. I think this is an issue of domestic violence in a city, urban violence, and who is best equipped to deal with it. And if we sit around and we debate, how many angels are on the head of a pin, or how many little details are there, or whether or not it's a rebellion or insurrection, perfectly correct for the court to decide that. I'm a lawyer, I agree with that. But while you're sitting there debating that, they're burning down the city. I don't know. I don't know how to parse that out. It's not my decision. But as an American citizen, we Americans are looking at this, and we're just frightened to death that this is going to spread all over the country. That's kind of where I am. So you're right. It's a balance between the law and the practicality of what to do. At the end of the day, the law will decide. But in the meantime, we've got to do something about it to stop what is not peaceful protest. Peaceful protest is perfect.
Well,
100%,
Professor, I do understand your point of view.
Is a peaceful protest for you? Say again?
I do understand your point of view, but don't you think that there is a risk of using military force against unarmed families, and it can send actually the wrong message about the American values?
Of course you are correct about that, and that's why we have a law in this country called the Posse Comitatus Act, which says that the military is not allowed to go and do law enforcement in cities domestically in the United States. We have such a law. But the question is here whether or not there are exceptions, such as the Insurrection Act or Riot Act, or the Rebellion, which is the exception to the president's ability to call in the federal National Guard. Now, I don't know the answer. The judge is going to decide it tomorrow. It'll probably be appealed. But again, we're going to spend time appealing to all the other courts. And I respect the rule of law. The rule of law must govern. Peaceful protest is sacred. But you have your questions are outstanding. The answers to those questions have to be decided by civil society, right? To be able to live in peace on a street and not have people burning down a city. And the law and the courts that says you can use the military or you can't use the military. I don't know the answer to that. Technically, the law is you cannot, except in exceptions. And the question is this an exception, or is this something the domestic police, the LA police, the LA sheriff can handle? They've shown themselves not capable of handling even lesser riots in the past. They've had many riots in LA that have gone out of control. So I don't know the answer to that. I think the court has to decide.
Still, the migrations, the migrants,
again,
this is very suspicious.
Because the court says, send the National Guard away, then Newsom's going to be taking this on, and he's going to have to be responsible for the result.
Professor, I'm very sorry, but we are talking about the migrants. They are a vulnerable issue in many countries. Therefore, don't you think that this approach can be traumatizing already vulnerable migrants communities?
Absolutely. I think that's very true. I think that what ICE needs to do, what Trump needs to do, is clearly define who is it that they're trying to go after, if you will. There's widespread support for taking the hardened criminals and who are here illegally and getting them out of the United States. What country would Azerbaijan, would anybody allow hardened criminals in and open the door and just come in and commit crimes? Nobody would allow it. But as far as what he was talking about, Newsom, the dishwashers, the workers here, I think that they should, we should be, give a lot of tolerance and feeling to those people and not traumatize them. And I think you're right. The message is there and it is a problem. And I think the answer to that is to come to a conclusion of how you handle something like this work together to solve it and end the violence, and then people won't be traumatized.
Well, indeed,
again,
you touched very important, but at the same time very sensitive issue, Professor. What checks exist to prevent abuses or overreach in such operations?
Well, to me, the main check is the law, the courts. And, again, at the same time, another check, if you will, is public opinion. And whether or not the public believes that all of this is just a political stunt in an election year where Trump is doing his thing politically and where Newsom is doing his thing politically. And if that's what you're doing, that is not acceptable. They should not be doing that. They should be focusing 100% on helping the people, also the migrants, immigrants who are here, to be able to apply to stay in this country legally? Absolutely. But if they're criminals, to get them out. And at the same time, not fight about politics. Newsom, Trump, and no benefit to that. Get together and work this out in an appropriate fashion. And that will help everybody, including immigrants who are here. And as I said, I'm a child of immigrants, and I feel for the immigrants. Absolutely. My parents came here with nothing. And so there are many around the world who want to come here. But if they're criminals and they want to come here to commit crimes, the door has to be closed and they have to be thrown out. There's no question. And I think there's almost high support on Democrats and Republicans. But to make it into a political stunt or a political issue in general is very, very bad for everybody.
Well, Professor, it's clear that if there is a criminal and those responsible should be, of course, taken to the prison or any other enforcement of the law action, but still, does this not blur the line between the civilian law enforcement and military action in the country?
That question is spot on. That's exactly the issue. And Americans are very concerned about that. We have a civilian commander-in-chief, that's the president. We have a military, and we also have state governors, and the state governors are in charge of their National Guards. So on that point, Newsom and his attorney general are correct. It's my National Guard. You want to make them federalized, and you want to call them up president, you've got to ask me. That's also what the law says. The law says also that if there's a rebellion, then the president can do it without the governor's consent. So this raises a big problem. It raises a problem. It does blur the line. It does do that. You are right. But the answer to that, not to sound like a broken record, is what will the court decide in this case? Technically, the law says military officers cannot do law enforcement, arrest people in general on the streets. That's Posse Comitatus Act. Can't do it. But except if there's riots, rebellions, and insurrections. So the question is this an insurrection? Is it a rebellion? Is it a riot that arises to the level of something where, there has to be some kind of action taken by the federal government? Tricky. As I said, it's happened before, in the 1800s. And even at the beginning of the country, President Washington came out with troops to crush the whiskey rebellion, which was farmers who didn't like an excise tax on whiskey. This has happened throughout our country. We've resolved it. We need to resolve this. But everybody's got to work together to get the answer, not to point fingers back and forth. And one thing that I think is totally ridiculous is Newsom's idea, which you had in your initial part of this discussion, where he's kind of blaming Trump and calling up the National Guard for the violence. I mean, I can't even understand the logic of that. I think it's completely off base. It's inverted. The reason for the violence is that there's violence on the streets. The question is who should deal with it. But it's not the problem of putting National Guard troops in to stop looters, that it's the troops who are causing the violence. I mean, it's very clear these people are violent, so somebody's got to do something about it.
Well, are there long-term risks in normalizing military presence in domestic immigration cases?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is a long-term risk here. This has to be resolved short-term. It cannot go on long-term. We cannot normalize military presence in our streets. We can't do it. And that goes against the tradition of our country. Again, with civilian control, the military doesn't, it's there to protect the United States abroad, to protect our borders from enemies coming in, and such to say, in World War I, World War II, and so forth, and other battles that the United States has fought. It is not to fight battles on the streets. So at the same time, I got to figure it out, but we can't keep this on endlessly. And I think your point is well taken, that there really are long-term risks. If we're to keep on extending this, then it will become normalized, and normalizing it is not the idea. You've got to stop the problem and then deal with it, but not make it a long-term solution. And every time something goes wrong, we send the soldiers in. That's catastrophic for a civil society like the United States.
Well, Professor, thank you. Thank you so much for joining our talk today.
No, thank you very much for the privilege of doing it.
Thank you. So that's all from Inside Politics. Tonight, we examine the widening divide over the Trump administration's immigration enforcement tactics, support for strong border clashing with warnings of militarization. The debate over where security ends and politics begins is far from over. Thanks for watching. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina, and see you soon.